We are glad everyone could make time tonight to listen to this, I think, going to be very dynamic panel. Um, we may wait just one more minute to allow a few more late arrivals to come on into the room. Um, while we're doing that, my name is Greg Kimball. I'm the Director of Public Services and Outreach here at the Library of Virginia, and I welcome you on behalf of the library. All right, let's get rolling. I'm delighted that the library is partnering with Anjali and Sisha Moon and the Jackson Project on this series of panel discussions. I met Sisha about a year ago, I think it was, right in the height of the pandemic. And she came to the library with what I thought was a pretty simple question. Who was Jackson? That simple question seems to have expanded quite a bit into a really dynamic research project that's resulted in programs, art installations, public conversations like the one we're going to have tonight. Obviously, we're celebrating to some part of this is to celebrate the 150th anniversary of Jackson Ward. Appropriate to our panel tonight, the ward was born out of a racist gerrymander, but was reimagined by its residents as a dynamic center of Black success and entrepreneurship. I think those are really the core ideas that I've taken away from the work we've done together. So without further, and by the way, you can go to the Jackson Project website to learn more. It's THEJXNPROJECT.com. So I am going to turn things over to the Moons, and thanks again for coming.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Greg. You have a kind of like radio voice, by the way. You can reach them at.
You can tell I've done a lot of media stuff, yeah.
Well, thank you. So yes, we are the Moon Sisters. I'm Sisha Joy Moon. This is my sister, Anjali Moon, and we are co-creators of the Jackson Project. And we are just delighted that you guys, are spending your Wednesday evening with us for today's discussion on From Gerrymandered to Gentrified. We have an action-packed panel and we'd like to introduce them. So first up, we have our moderator, Allan Charles Chipman. He is a faith-rooted organizer and transformation strategist. He is a lifelong faith community activist, having started his work at the ripe age of 6 in his hometown of Baltimore. And the crazy part is I can totally see Allan Charles preaching in the pulpit as a kindergartner. He serves as Initiatives of Change, faith-rooted organizer and transformation strategist, and recently ran for city council in the 6th district. His past experience includes work as a legislative aide in the Virginia General Assembly and a racial equity advocate at one of Richmond's Fortune 500 companies. He earned his bachelor's degree in human development and family science from Messiah College. In his free time, he enjoys creating music and recording for his podcast dedicated to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called A Difference in Thought. Allan Charles, we are so happy to have you with us, and we know you're going to moderate a great discussion. Next up, we have Brother Iman Shabazz. Before anything, Iman Shabazz is a son, elder, brother, uncle, cousin, friend, and baba to many. From appearing on CNN's American Morning to his own talk show called Fighting for Freedom, Iman has an incessant voice on education, awareness, and organization in the face of racial and social injustices. Among his many hats, he is the policy advisor for community engagement and reform initiatives in the office of the Commonwealth's Attorney for the city of Richmond, where he helped to organize a dialogue series called Beyond Containment. He has also served as the city's Alternatives to Incarceration Commission. He has also been on the Racial and Health Equity Community Team and the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force. He has a very deep, he said, who that? He has a deep-rooted love for mountain climbing, skydiving, swimming, biking, martial arts, and apparently he has agreed to take anyone on in a mean game of Scrabble. And I might have to take you up on that when this pandemic passes. Thank you for joining us tonight, Brother Iman.
Awesome. I know someone who also want to get in on that Scrabble game, Iman. Brother Ross, he's an avid Scrabbler. Next up, we have Sheba Williams. Sheba was born and raised in Richmond, Virginia. She earned her bachelor's degree in business management from Norfolk State University, as well as professional license in cosmetology and barbering and a master instructor's license. In 2012, she began working exclusively as a mobile barber stylist with a clientele spanning from DC to North Carolina. Through her travels, she found that more than one of the people she was working with had one thing in common with her, and that was a felony conviction. Her passion for helping others be her passion for helping others would be more than her passion for helping others would be more than a conviction. For more than a conviction led to her starting a nonprofit called Nolef Turns in 2016, which began as a support system for those who are justice and court involvement, but quickly evolved into a daily fight for removing the policies and stigmas around a past conviction. Welcome, Sheba. We look forward to your voice. Next up, we have brother Duron Chavis. Duron started his career in community advocacy with the Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia. While there, he founded the Happily Natural Day Festival, which focused on cultural awareness, health, wellness, and social change. In 2009, he founded Richmond Noir Market, which is a farmer's market that targets low-income communities that are located within food deserts across the city. In 2022, he served as a clean, I think we want to say 2020, because I know we Afrofuturists, but that's real in the future. But we're going to say 2020. In 2020, he served as a clean air ambassador on behalf of Earth Justice and the Hip Hop Caucus. In 2010, he was named Weekly's Top 40 Under 40, where he made the Power List in 2014 and 2015. He is alumni of Leadership Metro Richmond and was featured speaker at TEDx RVA. He served as the first community engagement manager at the Lewis Ginter Botanical Garden and the inaugural director of the Harding Street Urban Agricultural Center at Virginia State University. In 2020, he unveiled the exhibition called Black Space Matters at the ICA VCU, which helped to highlight issues with food justice and the importance of community spaces for people of color. Brother Duron, all the syllables, all the work. Glad to have you. And last but most certainly not least, we have Zenobia Bey. Z Bey, the poet as she's known, is a writer and spoken word hip hop artist. Along with music, basketball, and uplifting people to the best version of themselves, she pursues her passion as an educator, mentor, and community advocate. Through her art and activism with various organizations throughout the Richmond area, she seeks to impact not only communities within the cities, but this country as a whole. In 2012, she founded the grassroots nonprofit called Community 50/50, which does great work, by the way, which is a mentoring and outreach program geared towards the betterment of youth and families in Richmond and surrounding localities. She also currently teaches at 6 Points Innovation Center and was recently featured as an artist in the RVA Community Makers at VMFA and the Black History Museum and Cultural Center. Zenobia Bey, good friend, long time, great work, huge impact in the city, and we are especially happy to have your voice on this panel. Welcome.
Thank you, glad to be here.
So with that said, I feel like we're gonna pass the baton, right? We don't really have a lot of time to waste because we got a rich panel, and I know y'all about to get it in. So Brother Chipman, we're gonna pass the baton to you, open things up, and we look forward to a robust conversation. And I think, are we doing a post panel Q&A?
Yeah, 7:45, we'll open up the chat for questions.
We'll open it up. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go.
Indeed. Thank you so much for the introductions. And it's great to be here with some Richmond legends and anchors, and great to be able to have done some work with each and every one of you all. And so we're, as Anjali and Cecil were correct, I've been preaching since I was 6. So that also means a brother can be long-winded. So I'm going to stick it straight to the questions because there's a lot of content and conversation we want to have. So my first question to the group, and anyone can answer this one. The Jackson Project is rooted in celebrating the 150th anniversary of Jackson Ward, the question is, what has the ward meant to you and your work? And what do you envision for the ward over the next 150 years? I know we talked jokingly about Afrofuturism, but there will be Black people in the future, amen. And so we just want to know, what has the ward meant to your work, and what do you envision for the ward over the next 150 years?
Well, I'll start off by saying that personally, the ward has meant a lot because it showed me, I'm from Southside Richmond, I'm a native, and being born and raised in Southside Richmond, I didn't see too many entrepreneurships in business settings, except for the late, great Coach Jones, Bo Jones Sr., you know, with Pier 7. But coming to the ward, seeing a lot of entrepreneurs, small businesses, it gave hope, and it gave hope to the work and the youth and families that we work with. A lot of the youth and families we work with are in Gilpin Court and Jackson Ward. So it gives us hope to show them that they have space to grow. They have space to grow from, you know, a rich history. And I think the biggest thing in our work that we do at Community 50/50 is really just challenge to educate the people that's in Jackson Ward, in Gilpin Court, that may not know the history, to educate them the history. And so that way they can get empowerment from there. So that's something that I envision to implement in the work, inspired by the work in the ward, and continue to do the work.
That's wonderful. Would anyone else like to answer that? Brother Duron?
Yeah, let me say this, man. You know, I'm a child of Jackson Ward. I mean, I'm born in Richmond, you know what I mean? But my community activism was birthed in Jackson Ward. Very first volunteer opportunities that I took were at 00 Clay Street at the Black History Museum, Cultural Center, Virginia. Every day, you know, I volunteered there. I asked them for a job. And, you know, eventually they gave me a job, and my job was on a daily basis to give tours to young and old, you know, elementary school age kids, to adults, to senior citizens, people from all over the globe that were visiting, about the history of Jackson Ward. So I very literally, my formative years, this is me at 20, 21, you know what I mean? Getting paid $6 something an hour to educate, you know, members of the community about the legacy of 2 Street and Jackson Ward in general. Because of the community of elders that encircled me at that moment, from Waverly Crawley to Mr. Horn to you know, Basada White, Charles Bethea, Mary Lauderdale, even going back to Brian Little, when he ran the Black History Museum and Cultural Center, like all of those people encircled me and poured into me, you know what I mean? And it was through that intergenerational dialogue that, you know, I was, you know, formed as an activist, as a community person, right? It wasn't because I just jumped off the porch. It was because I had these elders around me supporting me in my activism. And it's where we started Happily Natural Day, you know? I was given the honor of having the responsibility to craft an event right in the back parking lot of the Black History Museum. You know what I mean? So Jackson Ward, for me, that means that space of entrepreneurship is very important to me. But even beyond that, it's the cultural legacy and this intergenerational dialogue that I was privy to by virtue of my early stages of activism in the ward. Where do I see the second part of the question was, where do we see the war going?
Yes, indeed, for the next 150.
Well, I feel a little bleak. I think it's about. I think there will be little or very few Black owners in Jackson Ward if we see the trends of today continuing. Unfortunately, but that's, you know, it's going to be a very classist situation. So, you know, the only way you be living in Jackson Ward is if you're making a lot of money, and we saw that even when we were back in the early 2000s. And so nobody has done anything to undo that, right? Just to be candid, right? So unless there's some intervention, significant intervention to change that, I see it only getting worse, baby. I'm sorry to be bleak, but that's just the reality we live in.
Well, it's a reason.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Brother Mon.
I just want, oh no, I see she would open it up as well. I'll defer, sis.
taking it when I was young, my mom used to work for RCAP, which was Richmond Community Action Program, and it was on the corner of Lee Street across from the church. And that was where nonprofit work was. That was where community work started. My goddad lived on Marshall Street. We would always have to go to Consolidated Bank, which was the only bank you could pay your rent at if you lived in Richmond Redevelopment and Housing Authority property. You used to stand outside of the bank and pay at the window. And then we would go to the Community Pride across the street and shop in the basement. I'm only 40, y'all. But this was Jackson Ward. And like, if you know about like Dudley's hair, and it's still there, you know about like all of the different areas of Black entrepreneurship, you saw so much growth and so much in our communities that built from that. So like Duron said, you know, it's hard to imagine losing and erasing the whole history. We have the Hippodrome, and we have, you know, our restaurants, we have, you know, Soul Kitchen, different things like that. But a lot of the history is really being erased. And when I say erased, I'm not just talking about the murals on the wall, I'm talking about the people and the culture. You know, 2 Street is something everybody know and traveled to Jackson Ward for, but the center of our entrepreneurship and our economic empowerment was right there in the heart of the city. And as a little girl with my mom working there, we would always frequent that area and see the community and see the neighbors who were, you know, older Black people who had lived there for years. You just don't see it anymore. So, you know, unfortunately, if we don't do something about the housing situation and issues and how expensive it is to live there, we're being erased, and the culture is going with it, aside from like our very, like, you know, prominent historic areas that will remain.
Indeed, indeed.
I think all of my comrades have mentioned some things that resonate with me without question. What I would like to add, if I can, is I remember as a teenager, one of my best friends used to work in the drug, you know, right there in that same spot across from where Sheba described. And I really thought that was a big thing back then, you know, because he, you know, one, because I didn't have a job, two, because, you know, I mean, as a teenager, it seemed just really important that he was in this particular position. And what I realized kind of moving forward as I married that with what I learned about the rich legacy of the Jackson Ward community is that it formed a foundation or a basis for us to sankofa. So if I can answer your question on both ends, what it means to me now and what I see moving forward, even in the context of what Duron so adequately out for us, in the context of the realities of the class contradictions, I would even say the racialized and oppressed contradictions, the reality is that there is opportunity for us to learn from a historical space with which we can return. And so for me, I'm looking forward to our continued struggle and continued organized work where hopefully we can have some impact on those conditions that Duron laid out, to the point where even if it isn't necessarily a recreation of Jackson Ward, we create and understand the importance of creating our own community spaces and creating the basis, if you will, for us to be able to meet our needs as a community in the way that it was done back then.
Thank you, and this is spot on. And Brother Duron, you are spot on. There's a reason why we called this From Gerrymandered to Gentrified. This is a condition that was created by a series of decisions over time. It reminds me of when James Baldwin called urban renewal Negro removal, right? And so this displacement that happens under the guise of development and the gentrification, or what some would say the cultural genocide that happens with these changing populations. And so we know, so I'm going to read some statistics just to let the viewers know what the types of changes that we've been seeing. Okay, so in 2021, the racial identity of Richmond and the community has been experiencing an undeniable shift. Per UVA Stat Chat, Richmond's white population has increased by 30% since 2005. Per Columbia University study called Facing Whiteness, between 2000 and 2016, Henrico and Chesterfield has seen an influx of minority populations. But during this period, the share of the white population in this county has decreased from nearly 72% to approximately 59%. At the same time, this is the same time that we've been seeing this increase in the white population, some calling it reverse white flight. And so when we see this battle for space and history that I saw a lot of you all speaking about, and I know that Brother Duron and Anjali at the ICA really were talking about Black space matters. And so in light of this, Jackson Ward is both a space for celebration, as we've been seeing, but it's also a cautionary tale when understanding how it has been disrupted by public policies that have helped to gerrymander, redline, and gentrify the community. Just when we talk about housing, which Sheba and so many others have brought up, just in a presentation the city gave yesterday in their regional housing framework, the median gross rent in Richmond has risen 20% since 2009, income only rising since 12%. 45% of Richmond households are cost burdened, and the median single family home sales price has increased 65%. Just from 2009. And when you isolate the pricing for new construction homes, it's up almost 85%. And a lot of this is taking place in historically Black communities, which are over 80% Black. And whether you want to factor in subprime lending in the recession and who got bailed out and who didn't, when you look at the activities the city has subsidized in development versus helping people stay, the question that I have for you all is, how have you seen policies directly impacting the populations that you serve, and what lessons can be learned to prevent the ward from falling victim to the next wave in urban renewal?
When I saw that question about the next wave, I was curious, like, not to be funny, but it's like the first wave was
Right.
like, what was the second wave? Where'd the second wave? I didn't know it was the second wave. So to answer the question, well, one of the things that I was fascinating was that when it came to tax incentives, like a lot of the tax incentives for or tax credits for development, was when you see the maps as to who got those, right? They were not in Jackson Ward, or they weren't in any of the formerly redlined neighborhoods. They were in like Riverside, River Road, in the West End, right? So while the city touts that they had these programs to help people, do development or what have you, a lot of that money went into places that didn't really need it in the first place. So when we talk about this idea of waves of removal of communities of color from parts of the city, I'm gonna just say this: like, I was working at Jackson Ward in 2000, and every day the conversation was about gentrification, right? And we watched it. Like, nobody did anything. I mean, and to be candid, it was like very little that folks could do. Honestly, this is a market-driven force. I mean, there's to put the onus on communities of color to try to solve for issues that are created by capitalism in large is kind of is unfair, right? It's saying, okay, if y'all pull y'all pennies together, then maybe y'all can save Jackson Ward. I mean, well, man, people were selling their houses for $300,000 in Jackson Ward in the 2000s. So fast forward to 2021, right? The only thing that I could see happening is that in small pockets in Jackson Ward, there will be retained Black ownership. There's Black developers right now that are developing apartment complexes and things of that nature. And even the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust has control over several blocks of land in, outside of Gilpin, right behind Shackle Cemetery, spaces that were formerly owned by Maggie Walker and where the homes are like people like Bill Bojangles Robinson, right? But even with that, you still have the largest landowner in that area being Richmond Redevelopment Housing Authority, right? They own the entire Gilpin Court and associated properties throughout the other side of Jackson Ward. So the question that we really should be asking is, how do we get land redistributed into community hands? And that is a policy question, right? If the city owns property, there are usually two ways that they're giving that property away. or getting rid of that property for either a profit or community benefit. A is either getting auctioned off to Motley's auction group, or is going into the Richmond Land Bank, right? Which then community members and developers can take those properties and turn them into either affordable housing or public green space, blah, blah, blah. I challenge all of us to engage our city council people, right, and the mayor's office in assuring that more properties that are viable, that are, not just, leaned over, decrepit to the side, not just blighted properties, but prime properties are put into the Richmond Land Bank, right, and are diverted from auction, because the people that go to the auction are typically the people with the type of capital that they can make a power move that most of our community members can't make. So I think that in terms of a policy, there is a way to kind of save some pieces of Jackson Ward, and through the land bank and trying to get those properties to the land bank. But I also caution, as a cautionary tale, like you said, let's think about other Black spaces in the city. Let's use Jackson Ward as an example of what not to do, right? Let's not ignore the Black Wells. Let's not ignore the Ruffin Roads, the Davy Gardens. Let's not ignore the Bell Meads. You know what I mean? Like, there are spaces in the city that are still predominantly Black, albeit they're predominantly on the South Side. Let's, retain those spaces, right? Invest in ownership of the land and community control of the land in those spaces so that we can retain that Black ownership.
Can I make a small point in relationship to that? I think that something that, again, Duron raises that I think is critically important is for us to understand, not just in the context of as he, again, pretty adequately alluded to, where we need to consider other spaces in the city in regards to land. We need to be clearer about our understanding in terms of why African communities were disrupted with regard to Jackson Ward specifically, because it wasn't just a matter of moving people out. We're talking about literally and physically breaking up and blowing up, disrupting, creating a gigantic trench in the land itself, removing the ability to be able to build, whether it's business, whether it's residential, or to build and create space for people to be able to exist, live, congregate, build family and community. So that is unlike any of the other neighborhoods that have been disrupted in the city of Richmond, where African people were then therefore removed, is the uniqueness of what happened in Jackson Ward. And what it resulted in now, as many of us have talked about our work or our relationship to Gilpin Court, and then the segregation on the very opposite, the separation, on the very opposite side of what is that, the highway, where you have these, I'll just say others with different class interests who have been able to capitalize off the utilization of that land space. So what we need to understand is our question can never be about solely just reclaiming, so to speak, that specific physical space, because it's not there anymore. So what we have to do is make it clear, we have to then therefore, in terms of our direction and our understanding of what we're going to do is, one, for the work that happens specifically in Gilpin, as we know that there are plans to, for all relative purposes, destroy the public housing spaces as they exist. Our organizing work needs to be along the lines of how do we make sure that we maintain control of that space specifically, along with the development that happens on it. It can't just be a matter of a grand scheme that is produced by the city to say, hey, we're going to create all this opportunity, whatever that's supposed to mean, in order for other folks to benefit from it, without taking consideration of how directly do the residents of that space currently and their descendants and those who would come into that space, but at whatever point in time they move to this, around the surrounding area, how they can then therefore benefit collectively as well. I thought it was important to add that.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in on, and I think what Duron said and Brother Shabazz said was just perfect on, and I'm gonna just speak like to the word inclusion. A lot of the things around gerrymandering and gentrification is foreign talk to the people that live in these spaces, right? So one of the things that I feel as far as the next wave, I think what Duron said was key, let's talk about the first wave. So let's educate the next wave on the first wave. So that way, when they're in these spaces, they can make decisions and they can learn to educate themselves and understand the empowerment of inclusion. So that way city and state is not making decisions for them. I think that's one of the big things that, you know, along with changing policy and going to legislation and things that we're doing as activists, is really going back to the people. I think a lot of times we forget the people have a lot of the power, and a lot of that is empowered through us educating them simultaneously while doing the work on the legislation and state level to change a lot of the laws and things like that. So, you know, I think, you know, just the next wave has to be informed about the first wave. And that's one of the things that we're finding, you know, through the work we're doing with Community 50/50, through the youth and family. A lot of them don't even know what's going on around them. It's like they're walking in a delusion of what's really going on. And some people may know, but don't feel like how it's really impacting them because they're just so numb and just used to being disenfranchised and used to people telling them what to do, that they don't even feel like they have a voice or power in their own community.
I have a lot to say, but I'm not going to take a lot of time. We're going to talk about history and how gentrification starts. It starts with the census that goes back 10 years. They start looking at median income to determine whose property can be taken in the next decade, who can be pushed out by the economic terrorism of, you know, how much you make. The fact that our minimum wage on the state level was $7.25 for years, and it never kept up with the cost of living. My population, the people that I serve, are people who are just as involved, people who have felony convictions. Felonization started in the beginning of time after slavery ended, and we weren't told that slavery ended. Right here in Virginia, there was a convention that got together to say, how do we keep the most Black people from voting, from being involved in the process, from gaining wealth? We have so many examples of Black thriving communities that were pushed out of spaces and forced to live in what people thought were subpar communities. And they built those communities up and they were destroyed by white violence. A lot of people know about the Tulsa violence, but a lot of people don't know about the DC riots. A lot of people don't know about the Knoxville, Tennessee riots. A lot of people don't know about the Red Summer and the New York draft riots. All of those things were put together to push Black people further out of generational wealth. And it's not as simple as let's focus on housing and making things better, because when redlining happened, and all of these things are happening simultaneously and at a systemic level. When redlining happened, and I just saw an article yesterday where Richmond Redevelopment had physically moved houses and allowed them to be empty and abandoned, and now they're revamping those houses and putting them back in the community because a highway was ran through there. And I'm not talking about the one on Jackson Ward on First Street. I'm talking about over in the West End. So this isn't something that is new. These things are systemic and they have been going on forever. So when we talk about felonization, we talk about Carter Glass and all of these people getting together to purposely disenfranchise as many Black people as possible. We talk about economic terrorism. We talk about the fact that if you get a felony conviction, you are pushed out of the ability to vote. You are disenfranchised by not being able to express your voice. You are subject to certain jobs and have caps on your income where people can legally discriminate against you because you have a past conviction. Even if you have done your state sanctioned time, they can say you can't be licensed in certain professions, even though Department of Corrections teaches these trades and makes amounts of money off of people's backs while they're incarcerated. For a lot of these corporate entities that will pay a person 23 cents while they're in prison but won't hire them when they come out. So if we say, let's fix this problem and allow more people to participate in the home ownership process, it's not that simple, because I'll tell you what happened with me and my husband, who both have 800 credit scores, assets, income, credit, no history of eviction, what have you. We were discriminated against twice. It took us almost a year to purchase our first home because the company took us through so many things. They asked us what school my daughter went to. That has nothing to do with the application process. So, you know, it's more than let's just make this opportunity available. we have to be intentional about making the terms better for people who can't necessarily afford the process. And it is not to fall on deaf ears when I say that it is very intentional to make sure that certain people who are at certain levels of income still don't qualify for what their white counterparts qualify for. So it's a lot to be said there about the systems and how all of these things come together to make sure that these people are pushed out. Because even things like the reverse mortgage loan process, where Black families own properties and a company will come in, and I won't name the company, but you can look it up because it's right here on Broad Street, will come in and say, we will give you a loan for the equity in your home, all of the equity in your home, and you can live here and you don't have to make payments on this loan until you pass away. And what happens when that person passes away, instead of passing that property down to their family, the company comes in and says, you can either sell this property. They don't tell you the terms of the loan because you didn't negotiate the project, the process, and they force you to take on a debt or sell the home and take what is left over from all of the equity they took out of the loan. So these things are happening, and they have been happening since the beginning of time to make sure that certain people don't stay in place. So I know that we're talking about Jackson Ward and like where the center of like our economics is, but this is all over the city. And the population that I serve has been caught in this trap where we were pushed into certain communities that we so nicely call courts now, but they're projects. They were projects, and they were put together and designed to push people in certain places and not give them upward mobility. Because if we were serious about making sure that people were successful, we would make sure that when they come into these housing communities, they would get the tools necessary to be able to get up and elevate from that situation. So we wouldn't be in this situation we are now, where now the properties are set to be destroyed. And they're scrambling to figure out where are all these people going to go. We can't just push everybody out to the counties and allow the spaces to be taken over. We have to be intentional about making sure that our people can stay in place and build on the history that they started with, without the threat of white violence coming to remove those communities and the culture that came behind it.
Yeah, that's very accurate. And one of the things that I love to remind people is that just because something is current doesn't mean that it is new. And so when you look at the same way that urban renewal and the plans of Harlem Bartholomew were not just in Richmond, but, I talked to organizers, Black organizers in Canada. There's a city in Vancouver, I think called Hogan's Alley, that a highway was built through the Black part of town. And I'm talking to them. I said, hey, where was that at? And I'm looking it up, and look, it's Harlem Bartholomew. So these are plans that were placed that had economic impacts. They had political impacts on those areas as well. And so what a lot of people don't recognize when we talk about gentrification, especially which houses are being sent to tax sale, what does it mean when grandma can't stay in her house and can't pass it down to her descendants to use as, I was talking to Black entrepreneurs who said, it's because my uncle had a house that I was able to get collateral for a loan for my business. But if he was priced out of his home or didn't have the ability to retain that also affects the type of businesses and the wealth that we have generationally. And so it's that same type of current that's kind of flowing in what we can see through Jackson Ward that's happening all over the city. We're seeing a lot of the prices going up in Northside as well. And the same struggles that we're seeing with who's being subsidized by the city in Black homes is also happening with Black businesses as well. There's some interesting research out of Columbus, Ohio by Trayvon Logan, who overlaid maps of redlining and then Black businesses that were available during the Green Book to be a safe haven for travelers. And as he looked back, not only were the Black homes disappearing, but a lot of those dots where the Green Book businesses were also kind of disappearing. And so as we are seeing these things as well, these are decisions that are being made. These are choices that are being made. These are urban city plans that are being made on who is getting subsidized versus who is not. When you have developers who can get 10, 15-year tax abatements, but we just made a $4 million cut to tax relief for seniors and the disabled, right? So these all have to do with a lot of the city planning that happens. And so when we're speaking about the spatial politics of a place, not just voting and gerrymandering, but what is the culture of that place, what wealth is being developed, and what's being knocked down and who's getting pushed out. It still is the same type of reasoning that was used that we saw within Jackson Ward. One of the things that I want to touch on as well, because this is also about standing on the shoulders of people who have come. So we also are standing on a history. My question is also, you all shared a little bit about whose shoulders you all are standing on. Can you speak on how your work is involving the next generation, and not just fighting for what space will they be able to occupy within the city, but their ability and their political ability to imagine and implement their imaginations on the space of Richmond? Who are you mentoring, and what's your work looking like for the next generation that embodies the same type of spirit and room that was provided for us by the leaders in Jackson Ward?
So, I think that it's imperative for us to teach our children about how we develop strategies and systems. And that it's one thing for us to be educated about the problems that our communities face and to know the history of the problems that our communities have faced. It's a whole nother thing to engage them in critical thinking, to be able to process strategies that can move the needle forward for our communities. I see a lot of us, like a lot of our work overlooks that strategizing part and that critical envisioning, what I like to call radical imagining, right? Can you imagine a future where Black people have control of land and are developing community assets, businesses, homes, unimpeded by white supremacist forces? And if you can't imagine that, what does it look like? What does it take for us to get there, right? And working with young people to, imagine those realities and being able to even see that the way it looks in our work is, we're collaborative with organizations like Groundworks, and those young people that work with us, we do a lot of public green space building, right? So our community orchards, our community gardens, urban farms, we got these young people out there building rainwater harvesting systems with solar power infused into it, permeable pathways. You know what I mean? Like it's a different type of work, but those young people get to say, hey, look, I was participatory in that. And then they're using their critical thinking skills to figure out, how do I develop this plumbing system? You know what I mean? To ensure that these trees get watered that'll be here for the next 5-10 years, right? And I'll be honest, I think that it's tough work to do because you've got to hold space, not only for the young people, but you have to have resources. So it goes beyond just a palliative. It's easy for us to give food to kids and like after school tutoring and things like that. There's a whole nother thing to like provide them the resources so that they can co-create the world that they want to see. You know what I mean? So, that's the struggle as it stands for us, is like tapping into those resources so that these young people can create the world that they want to see, instead of it just being like, hey, we got these veggies for you, come get some free food, you know what I'm saying? Or come get these backpack with school supplies, I'm not shaking down anybody that does that work. I'm just saying that that's like catching the baby out of the end of the river. Like, how do we stop somebody from throwing the babies in the river? As the first place is the type of work that I feel like we need to be engaged in. So yeah, I would definitely say that that's the shoulders that we stand on, is like critical thinking, movement building, organizing for Black communities explicitly, and not organizing in terms of like doing protests and rallies, but I'm talking about organizing to create a new reality for tomorrow for our people. And lastly, I just want to say that, I appreciate that remark in regards to gentrification happening all over the place. One of the things that I feel is super hard for us to get through our heads is that this stuff that we talk about that's happening in Richmond is so much bigger than Richmond. Mm-hmm. Bro, when you get to organizing outside of the city and you work with people in DC and Baltimore and Philly and Chicago and Atlanta and Raleigh, Durham and San Diego and Cleveland, Ohio and Philadelphia, you comparing notes with brothers and sisters that look just like you that are going through the same exact thing. It's the same script, but different leads in the roles, right? That's when you start to realize that, yo, man, this shit is so much bigger than Richmond, that this is a global reality that we're facing, right? And when you start to expand your thoughts on it, it's like, okay, we start local, but remember that this is global phenomenon. This is a battle against white supremacy, corporate capitalistic control of communities of color across the globe. Look at what's happening in South Africa. I mean, South Africa right now is erupting in revolution, right? On one side of the highway is 80% Black, and on the other side of the highway is 90% white. And this is 2021. So I just asked, I would encourage people that work directly with youth, man, like help them understand that this is a global reality that they're living in, and that what's happening in Richmond, Virginia is not just Richmond. This is happening all over the place. Get them connected to other youth, other community organizers from outside of the city. You know, help them see models of community organizing and community engagement that's gonna expand their thought process and their critical thinking ability, right? That's gonna help them imagine, you know, new ways of doing this shit that looks way more evolved than what we're seeing right now in our region.
Absolutely. That's
yeah. One of the things that
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, definitely critical thinking. Yeah, I was gonna say definitely critical thinking, and that's one of the things that, you know, Community 50/50 prides itself on, with engaging our youth with critical thinking through our lyrics and beats workshop. So it's not just about music, right? So the music and the art is a way to engage. Once you engage them, now you can pretty much inform with anything. One of the youth from lyrics and beats, you know, with understanding policy and ownership and IP and bringing on your own intellectual property. Zuri Fleming, she started her own LLC and has her own record label. She ain't but 19. So we talking about shifting the narrative and ownership and understanding the empowerment of it. The first thing we have to do is find strategic ways to engage our youth. And I think a lot of times we come in and saying, okay, we're going to do this, we need to do this, we need to know that. It's building those relationships with the youth and families to understand what information they can, one, receive, and then once they can receive it, now empowering them to go out in the communities abroad to, you know, make change. Because a lot of times, you know, we don't meet people where they are. You know, we come in with our own agendas, our own objectives, or what we think they should know, but, you know, that form is that now you can know where to strategically go. So definitely, you know, exposing the youth in the city to, you know, other youth in other cities, other youth that are doing the same work and using their voice to express themselves, is understanding how they can use their voice for empowerment. And then also now it goes to changing policy. Now, if you can use your voice to empower yourself, you can sit at the city hall, you can go and speak before, you know, your city council and start getting change. Now you have their confidence, because a lot of the youth don't think they can do it.
Yeah, I would even just say that in addition to identifying these points of encouragement for cultivating empowerment, we also want to start raising awareness and raising education levels around how we develop our own systems of governance, how we develop our own systems of existing in the world, so that it's not just reliant on the policies that have been imposed on us, but that we create our own systems of justice. We create our own systems of how we, you know, for all other purposes, how we relate to each other in terms of community, so that we're meeting our needs the way that we want to meet those needs. We're defining what those needs are, and we're building things, we're producing services, or we're producing goods that meet those needs at the highest levels possible. And where we don't have the skill or the know-how in terms of how to build those things, then we can learn from others. We can learn from the historic examples that have been laid before us, and then determine for ourselves, how do we want to use this information? How do we want to use this to resolve the problems that exist for us in a present context?
Absolutely. And that's so important. And Duron, I really resonated with what you were saying, and recognizing that these are patterns that have emerged. This was a strategy that was emerged. And so if we're facing a strategy, we have to implement a strategy as well. I've been really looking into Philadelphia. There's a lot of similarities to what we're going on with our city, and man, I wish we had more time because we could talk about, you know, what is the role of expansion of university and how does that change things such as order maintenance, policing, and how that intersects with the criminal justice system. But, you know, we're short on time. So I want to thank you all for your input. I want to give people that opportunity. We want to transition to our Q&A portion as well. If there's anyone in the audience that has any questions, you can use the Q&A portion. If you go down on your Zoom to the furthest right next to the raise hand button is Q&A. So you can put in questions so our audience has the opportunity to participate and ask any questions they may have for any of our legends and anchors on screen here.
Quick question. Can Jackson chime in real quick?
Absolutely.
Please.
First of all, this was an amazing discussion. You know, it's not lost on us that Library of Virginia, Rich Public Library are partnering with us to provide this platform for these type of conversations. They're honest and they're long overdue. When we think about Jackson, you know, Jackson is a framework for us because we feel like every community has a Jackson. And when we say community, we mean cities. There are Jacksons all over the globe, as Duron said. And the Jackson framework, it's undergirded by 8 pillars. And they are preservation, pedagogy, philanthropy, proprietorship, as well as public engagement, public programming, public art, and public service by way of public policy. And the reason why those are the pillars that Anjali and I came up with is because, you know, we asked this question, who is Jackson? It really led us to the origin story about Jackson Ward. And when you actually understand the origin story of Jackson Ward, it kind of goes to what Sheba is saying and Duron and everyone on this panel saying. We don't have to imagine what it can look like because Jackson Ward did look like this. During urbanized enslavement, we had Black Richmonders who were building intergenerational wealth while still in technical bondage. Because of the financial fortitude that Black Richmonders were exercising well before Reconstruction even emerges, coupled with the electoral, you know, and political prowess that then they were handed down with 1871, that's why Jackson Ward was gerrymandered, because we weren't realizing what it meant to be Black homeowners, entrepreneurs. We have the first Black homeowner in Abraham Peyton Skipwith in 1793, not 1893. A lot of time we talk about the shoulders of Magiel Walker and John Mitchell, but they were standing on shoulders from 1793. This is a Black man who not only owned a home, but had one of the first, if not the first, fully executed will in the entire city of Richmond, with not only plans for how he wanted his home to be used for his family, but how he wanted to leverage the home as a space of entrepreneurship. And so I think that when we talk about getting to gerrymandered, we have to, or to gentrify, we have to really start kind of with what Sheba was saying, with how we use public policy through a historical context, all the way going back to being a gerrymandered space. And if I can say one more thing, I know Brother Iman was talking about the fact that the neighborhood was literally gutted, you know, in urban renewal, and between 1952 and 1958. I know that whenever Anjali and I are approached about Jackson Ward, which is often because Jackson Ward is on the top of, you know, on the tips of everyone's tongue, we hear a lot about this one-to-one placement. You know, for every new development coming in, somebody should stay. And I was telling Anjali recently, I don't know if this is even a term, but I believe in one-to-one-to-one. For every new person you bring in Jackson Ward, one person needs to stay and one person needs to be brought back who is displaced, because descendants were robbed of intergenerational wealth. And when you make sure that one person stays and you bring one person back, it should also be connected to pipelines to home ownership, not just rentals. And so I think, because I think someone put in the chat, what can the city do? There's a lot, not only to repair and repart, but also the path forward. So I just wanted to chime in, and I know Anjali probably is going to want to say something too.
No, I mean, I think what you're saying is spot on. I also just want to echo that this is an excellent panel. I was getting text messages during the talk saying this is like the best panel I've ever seen, especially like coming through a space like the Library of Virginia. So we appreciate the platform. You know, as Sisha said, what we have and what everyone really has been saying, what we have in Jackson Ward is in many ways a blueprint when we talk about this idea of just how insidious this idea of gentrification is, and urban revitalization, that it's not something that's just living in the Richmond space, it's something that's going across the country. You know, maybe what we have in Jackson Ward and its history and potentially its current moment is a blueprint for what it means to kind of put a stop to some of this. I don't know if we can put a genie back in the bottle, but I think that we can be creative in the ways in which we approach things. And some of that lives in the policy space. I feel like a lot of conversation happens around what can an administration do? What kind of pressure can we put on an administration? And that is valuable, and we need to keep our foot on the gas in that space. But I don't think we end there. I think when we look historically, when strides were made, even in the last year, when strides were made, it's really the people who are saying, well, you know what, I'll ask for forgiveness later. I'm not asking for permission for the things that need to change to get changed right now, right? So what you have in a person like an Abraham Skipwith is a person who said, well, I'm not waiting for the law to decide that I'm a full human being and that I should not be in bondage. I'm gonna figure my way out. And that's what you have in a Harriet Tubman. That's what you have even in people that we celebrate, like a Martin Luther King or a Malcolm X. These are people who are thinking outside of the confines of policy, of administration, of our, you know, democracy in this structure. And so what I just want to encourage us to do is kind of keep that revolutionary mindset, yes, within putting pressure on the administration, but outside of that. And how do we take some level of responsibility in our own personal autonomy as a community in creating the realities that we want to see? And that can be easier said than done. I'm not trying to romanticize this idea. It takes work, but I think it's work that we can find support for. And I think that if we can galvanize the energy that was built over 2020 and use it in the right way and not let that window of opportunity close on us, there's something genuinely progressive to be done in Jackson Ward to let it be that blueprint. Because when we think about the land trust, when we think about the city, when we think about RRHA, when we think about what Sisha just said, 1-to-1-to-1, and I mean, we haven't said it in this conversation yet, but let's not forget about this idea of reparations, right? And what reparations really means. And that can look like a check, which means something. You know, a lot of times people are like, oh, well, that'll just be money. Money matters, right? So sometimes it lives in the space of money. Sometimes it lives in the space of property ownership. Sometimes it lives in the space of access to certain resources that we have just been kept away from. And so I think we have to also just not be shy about utilizing the term reparations, and then being really open about the way in which we approach the term and what we define it as, and how we hold people accountable to reparting, you know, at the end of the day. Because there are many communities that have had resources reparted onto them from the American government, and there's no reason that we shouldn't also receive that. And so I just want to make sure that we keep that as an active part of the conversation as well.
I think that's absolutely. Oh, go ahead, you.
Oh, go ahead, because I know we're getting on time. Go ahead.
Yes, because I know we're tight on time, and we do have a question from the audience. But I think that is important, and you know, not being afraid of the concept of reparations. A lot of the where we got is pretty much, as a city, we got what we paid for. We subsidized who we subsidized, and we didn't subsidize who we didn't subsidize. And so the answer to that is going to have to come through some form of repair. And so I think a lot of times people don't think of policy as a form of repair. And so that it could be things such as reparative rights. It could be that due to our legacy of displacement, we don't send legacy Black-owned homes to tax sale. It could be that if someone had a tax credit for seniors, when they pass it on to the next generation, because we want to keep that wealth in the family, that we allow some of that tax credit and relief to stay for the next generation, so that can stay within the family and circulate within our communities. So there's a lot of ideas, and when we're talking about what does reparations look like within this context, there's a lot of opportunity for that. We did have one question, and how are we doing on time, Sisha, by the way, also?
I think we actually have to wrap it up. I know Brother Iman responded, but one more thing, because Anjali did talk about reparations. Can we also just mention responsibility? You know, we have to be honest with Jackson Project. Me and Anjali get emails all day about Jackson Ward. And a lot of it is from white Richmonders or white transplants that are moving to Jackson Ward, and they want to know more. And if we talk about responsibility, we also have to understand this is the first historically registered Black urban neighborhood in the country. This is sacred space. So there's also a responsibility to homeowners who are coming into this space to ask themselves, is this space for me? Like, and I think that in addition to reparations, we just have to talk about the responsibility of those who say they are allies and say they want to help us in this work. As should these spaces be reserved for Black Richmonders? I think is going to be important too.
And I think that's just a paradigmatic shift that has to happen for just the country and society as a whole, because people look to take advantage of opportunities. What they see in Jackson Ward is an opportunity. Like Duron, I was introduced to Jackson Ward in early 2000s, 2001 to be exact. And there were homes for sale literally for $13,000. You know, at the time, this is the moment when it made the endangered neighborhoods list. And what we might not have known then, but quickly learned, is that that is a bat signal to developers across the country. You know, people who have disposable income to come in, gobble these homes up en masse, and then turn them around and flip them for literally 10 times what they purchased them for. And so, you know, I don't know. I just feel like when I think about responsibility, I feel like we're so far away from that in some ways, because America is just so, as the mentality of it is so deeply entrenched in the dollar. You know, it's the cost versus the value. The value for us is in the historical relevance of the space, but for them, the value is in the cost. And that's the thing that kind of reigns supreme. And so hopefully in this moment, you know, we kind of lead people to a shift in mentality, a shift in mindset, and understanding that there are other layers to this concept of value. But unfortunately, that is what we see, just being extremely, it's pervasive through Jackson Ward, through the city. I mean, and Jackson Ward is not the only neighborhood in Richmond that's affected by this. As Duron said, the only one that's almost not touched is the Ruffin Roads. I mean, because even Manchester, Blackwell, that's already affected. I mean, all of Richmond has just been, I mean, where you gonna go? When I'm looking at homes, I'm like, I tell you, I bought a home in 2007 for $140,000 in Northside. That home today just sold for $380,000. How is that possible in the span of 10 years in a city where it's not a whole bunch more jobs that have been developed? People aren't making a ton more money. I mean, the concept of that to me is just outrageous. And so, you know, I don't know. I just feel like we have a ton of work to do on this idea of responsibility. It spans across a whole bunch of folks. You're on mute, Duron.
I was gonna say it's capitalism, baby.
Yeah.
All day.
That's how it works, Jack. There, you just told you like 30% white people left out of Chesterfield, Rico, and they came 20% increase of white folks in Richmond. And Richmond ain't getting no more bigger. They ain't making no more new land in Richmond. So it's the law of displacement. You know what I'm saying? Supply and demand. Yeah, I mean, the demand is there. They're like, yo.
I mean, I was
topped that $400,000 house right up the block from where I live on North Avenue, because supply and demand. You know what I'm saying? Dude flipped it. He made the improvements. That's what it's worth as far as the value, considering, you know, what all the other houses in this neighborhood is going for, because people want to live in the city. They used to want to live over here.
All of a sudden.
I say, look. But I like when 4th of July reminds them where they live.
But you know, just to talk about a neighborhood adjacent to Jackson Ward, and I know we have to go, but think about Carver, right? Where you still have a concentration of Black people living there. But, you know, you see slowly but surely VCU trickling in. But was reading an article someone shared with me the other day, the properties, those condos that are right across the street from Maggie Walker High School just sold for $2 million a piece to VCU. They just dropped $8 million on a quarter of a block, right? And so whatever they plan to do with that property, what is the impact that that's going to have on those homes in Carver, right? What is that going to do to the tax values? Are we going to see the slow but sure pushing out of the few Black people who are left over there? And the next thing you know, it's the expansion of the athletic facilities at VCU. You know, you don't mute again, Duron.
I ain't gonna keep. I'm not gonna keep talking. Look, and I hate to be nihilistic and like very pessimistic about this, but yo, in light of like the fall of capitalism, like what everything that you're saying is about to happen. I mean, there's no way around it. Like there's literally like no, you can't make a law that says that this guy can't sell his house to a private developer. And if somebody come with the right price, like, yo, grandma's dead. Cass is like, yo, no, you know, not many people are going to turn down, you know, large figures for the land based off of the historical value. Like, I mean, I think some of us would maybe, but you know, realistically, there's a lot of folks that are challenged financially out here, and you know, being able to make a move with large influxes of capital based off of land that they're not accessing, you know what I mean? They're not using, and it would take them way more money to actually improve the property to turn it into a rental. Yo, it's gone, Jack. Like, let's not be naive or Care Bear unicorn eyes. Like maybe there'll be some nice person that'll, you know, yo, in real time, there's hundreds of people that are literally like losing their home today. Like I had like, let me just tell you the story. I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna hit mute and I'm gonna just be quiet.
No, it's okay.
The house that I live in right now. So purchased by my partner's grandparents in the 1950s. House was built in the 1920s, right? Family member that was living in the house before us could not afford to, we were on fixed income, couldn't afford the taxes and the increase in taxes in the area. So house was on the verge of foreclosure. So me and my partner decided to take over the mortgage, and here we are. This is rare. Not many people, you know what I'm saying, have family members that have the financial fortitude to be like, all right, boom, instead of this house going to the bank and the bank foreclosing on the house and then it going into tax delinquency or whatever. Like, nah, there's not many people that have the financial fortitude to be like, all right, boom, I'm gonna come take this joint over and we're gonna do the repairs and we're gonna fix it up and we're gonna, you know what I mean, keep this in the family, you know what I mean, for generations to come, because we know that the house is worth well more than its current state, right? And then when we do the improvements, it'll be worth even more, and we can keep it in the family, use it as a wealth building tool. And multiply that scenario by all the north side, what's happening on south side, what's already happened in the East End, and that'll give you the answer to the situation that we're facing. Like, if we can replicate collective community care, support that can start to take these properties on, then maybe we got a way out. You know what I'm saying? Or if there's a philanthropist that's willing to like put money into a trust to preserve and conserve these homes and make them affordable housing, then maybe we got a way out. But those are crapshoots at best. So I'm gonna just leave it at that. Maybe somebody's on the call that's got that kind of bread, that's ready to do that thing. And if so, you know, let's talk. I'd love to see it happen.
No, it's absolutely, you know, correct. As Dr. King said, we must rapidly make this shift from being a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society, because when the profit motive runs unchecked, then the triple evils of militarism, racism, and capitalism and poverty become inconquerable. Right now, this is the optimist king. This is the I have a dream who in 68 says, my dream became a nightmare because perhaps I was a little too naive. And so if it is this profit motive, it is the value system. We talk about responsibility. It's easy for us to just say, well, the profit motive lives in City Hall. Right. Does it happen to, you know, I met so many equitable developers who said, you know what, when I see how neighborhoods are changing, I've just made a decision in the, you know, and they could have been sitting high in the seller's market right now that said, I don't do more than 1 or 2 houses in an area because I know what that will mean for their neighbors. When I even look at my neighbor, my former neighbor, Mr. Red, who was renting across the street from me. It was a house. It was back when the neighborhood wasn't as booming, that someone was renting. My neighbor who bought his house lived in that house, and that was his path to upward mobility for him to be able to buy a house. But now with the market going up, I saw 2 houses go up on my street worth $380,000. I literally come back next week and my neighbor is gone. And everybody wants to know what happened to him. Where is he going? What happened is the market changed and selling became more profitable than renting. And we see the sign going up, and I get mad every time I look across the neighbor, because he was our neighborhood watch. That was the spirit of the community. But how do you put a price tag on Mr. Red? Where does he fall in the profit motive? Where does he fall into the incentives and who we keep? And it is that same type of profit motive and that same type of reaction and infrastructure as that is what we are facing. And that's not just, though it also includes, because I'm wondering if this person got a tax abatement. So that doesn't just live in City Hall, but that responsibility lives within us. It lives for people who move into the neighborhoods, for the people when I was running for office who would roll down, chase me down and say, hey, I know I'm a gentrifier. What can I do? You know, maybe I shouldn't get my new basement or put, the gentrifier font that we talk about, a little joke, but anyways, it's like, what can we do, right? So this is a shared responsibility that we have. Jackson Ward, what happened to Jackson Ward is a cautionary tale, not just for people who are in City Hall, but for people who aren't elected, for people who are flipping houses, for people that are buying things from tax sale and saying, do I want to disrupt this generational wealth so that I can flip that? That is a change and a revolution of thinking. As Gail sat out here and said, the revolution will not be televised, because that's the change in thought that you can't even take a picture of, that will put us into a different situation. And so I thank you all for contributing to this conversation. And this is a continual revolution of thought. This is the Senko 5 Brother Mon talked about and Sister Shisha talked about. This is what we can go back and get the philosophy of Maggie Walker that didn't just say, I'm going to turn my pennies into dollars, but let us put our pennies together and turn our pennies into collective dollars. And so that is the legacy that we have. These are the crises that we face, but thankfully Jackson Ward left us a blueprint that we can continue to build upon today. And with that, I'll give it back to the Moon Sisters.
That was mic drop for me.
Straight up. That was a wonderful closing.
Greg, you want to chime in as you close us out? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody. It was a fantastic panel. Certainly gave me a lot to think about. We talked earlier before the session about this commission I'm going to be working for, and I think there's a lot here that they need to hear. So thanks to all of you, and look forward to the next session. We're going to have 2 more of these programs, and I'm sure that this was amazing. Thank you.
Yes, before anyone logs off, our next session will be on Wednesday, August 18th. It's going to be called the Virginia Way, and we're going to have an action-packed panel yet again with institutions across the city, some that might have had oppressive origins, and talking about how they are committed to redefining a new way for Virginia moving forward. So that whole dynamic of the past 150 and the next 150. So hopefully you'll join us.
Right. Thanks everyone for coming and for staying. We appreciate all the attendees, and thank you panelists for an amazing discussion.